Thanks everyone for attending this panel on keeping your community happy. I'm Nick, I'll be moderating the event, and I would like these lovely people to introduce themselves. So Javier, why don't you start at the end?
Hello, I'm Javier Carrillo-Costa. I'm coming from Barcelona, Spain, and I've been doing mobile games for 90 years in the same company. So started with the Nokia Engage. We were on stage when iPhone launched their App Store, so with Jobs, and then we've been doing a lot of things, so third-party games with EA. We did first Battlefield Mobile, Disney. Then we started with our own stuff, so responsible after Pulse. So we've now over 100 million downloads, and we are launching a new game very soon, and as well starting with VR.
Very cool. Chris.
I'm Chris Peters. I work at Mag Interactive. I work in the Live Ops department. I manage releases. I'm fairly new to this game, but in the last 2.5 years, I've experienced quite a lot of problems and solutions, and hopefully I can give some insight to those.
Hi everybody, I'm Erik Morales. I lead the games business for AWS in Europe. I've been working with games customers since 2011, but I've been playing games for a stupid amount of time. For the nerds out there, I have a 2-slot Neo Geo gold cab that I bought cash from a Pizza Hut in suburban Washington, D.C. that is still sitting in storage in my apartment in Stockholm. So just to know, I'm one of the brethren, but I'm super happy to be here.
Nice.
I'm Farley. I think I've been making mobile games for about 20 years as well. Have worked with iPlay originally back in the days of WAP and Java games, and then co-founded a studio in Scotland making mobile games, which is now up to about, I think, 60 people and doing very well. I left that about 3 years ago to join ChilliConnect, which is a technology spin-out. ChilliConnect's a platform for running live games, and something completely different, but it's been quite successful. This time last year, actually, remembering back, I was stuffing ChilliConnect pens onto everyone's notepads, the night before everyone arrived, and I'm thinking, why the hell am I doing that? But a month later, we raised seed finance, and by September, we'd exited to Unity. So if you ever get asked to put pens on notepads, do it with a smile on your face. So we don't directly deal with people's gaming communities directly now. We provide tools that will help you manage those gaming communities, and it's been really interesting the last couple of years to work with a wide range of different developers, from tiny indies all the way up to publishers, and help them be successful. So yeah, it's really great to sort of view the industry now from a different perspective to one before where we were actually running a studio.
Cool. So to get started, I mean, as you say, you guys on this side are more like tools-based, and you guys are more directly on the games-based. But I mean, all of you have kind of positive and negative experiences with communities around gaming. So can you elaborate on some of like the more positive experiences you've had? We'll get into the more negative, grisly stuff afterwards, but we'll start nicely. So what are some of the positive experiences you had? Chris, maybe you'd like to start us off?
Yeah, I think so. At the moment, I run events in some of our live up titles, so WordBrain 2, and the feedback from players when we're running the events is really engaging. They love like the heart of the event, so it's really trying to give the players what they're asking for, and if they're asking for it, they're going to come back and play, and that's how we keep them happy and keep them in those games.
Yeah, so we can share on Respawnable. We did a 5-year event, and for that we contact the community, the YouTubers, and all people that have been playing. So we were kind of passing the 65 million downloads. It was important for us, and all the community just went crazy about that. So we did contests. Everybody was participating. We had a lot of fan art. We had video. We had millions of views. So it was really engaging for us to see how this community just mobilized to do something big at that event. A lot of even YouTubers that started with us and then become more famous came back, did a special video on that one. So it was amazing to see how the community was giving back and how happy they were about that.
Okay, so you would say actually that the success of this event was purely that you built it up so much, you got everyone engaged through YouTube as well, and got buy-in in advance, and therefore your community understood what was happening.
Exactly. We were just like seeding to different type of people who are going to be doing that. It was more like a symbol for all those players, and they were, at the end, it was even more important. The event seemed to be more important for them than even for us, the 5 years. So it was cool. We did some 5-year T-shirt in the game. We had contests. So we're doing a lot of crazy, just creative things, and it works. A lot of small little things that it works really well.
Very cool. Erik, your thoughts on working with the communities that you do? Obviously, one step removed a lot of the time, but.
Well, I think everybody in this room who makes games or works on games or supports games plays games too, and cares and enjoys playing games. We work with a lot of different industries at AWS, obviously, and there's a common trope that my team will hear me hear all the time, that you can be really passionate about financial services, but you don't go around opening up bank accounts for fun on the weekends, right? Whereas in the games industry, the most vociferous fans and the biggest critics of one another's work are other people who make games, right? And I think one of the things that I love the most about working with this industry in particular is, I'm a fan, right? And everybody on our team is a fan, and so we're a part of that community. We feel like there's skin in the game, and so we feel it when things don't work. And I think from a positive perspective, I think one of the things that I love the most is being there when some companies have achieved really crazy computer science milestones, right? So recently we helped Fortnite with the black hole, right, as a key example. And working with Epic on that was, just astounding. This is a company with one game. The data warehouse behind that is larger than Google's search index. Right? That's insane, right? But on the flip side of that, working with the thousands of indie devs all over the world who are just downloading a personal edition of Unity and hacking around and trying to build something really fun and cool for the first time, that's what's really neat to us about this. So it's that kind of full spectrum. But yeah, I think the community side of it is it's an elegant place to be right now.
Cool.
Yeah, I think one of the really cool things now about being a game developer is this relationship that you have with your community. Before it was a case of you produce a game, you'd stick it into a box and put it on a shelf in a shop, and people either bought it or they didn't, and there wasn't really this kind of two-way dialogue. And I think now that can be really exciting to see, that you can speak to your community and they can speak back to you, and that we see a lot of our developers having that two-way conversation with the players of their games, not just to tell them whether they like the game or not like the game, but actually to feed back and tell them what it is specifically they like about the game and what types of things they'd like to see more of as well. I think when you're running live operations for a game, actually figuring out what to build and what not to build is really important. And if you build what your community wants, then I don't think you'll go too far wrong. I guess one example that we saw on a very simple level that was really cool, probably quite early on in our journey, was a relatively small developer who were really trying to get to grips with live operations for the first time. We're going to do a content update, we're going to do one a month, and they did the live content update and they made a mess of it and introduced a really bad bug into the game, which ruined it. And this happens time and time again. But because they'd used our platform, and because they had the ability to talk and to message their community, and not only to talk and to message their community and say, sorry, look, we've messed up, and to say, look, we're working on it, we'll resolve it soon, but also to gift in-game currency and some virtual items were, I think at that point, unique. That created amazingly positive sentiment for that community, and they saw virtually no churn of their players during that period. So I think when you see the small guys make a mistake with an honest endeavor and then pull it back around because of the tools you've created, I think that's been one of the most rewarding and positive elements of being able to enable developers to have this two-way communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And in my experience as well, always working with communities has led to just a much more open dialogue. It's helped inform, as you say, the choices you make as a developer, but also keeping them in the loop of, when things go well as when things go bad, just means that they're far more understanding. Everybody's human. People know that development teams sometimes will deploy something that shouldn't really have been deployed. And rolling back on that can be very painful, but if you are engaged with your community, then it's much easier to help them understand why and how this has happened, and that you're trying your best to resolve the error. Cool. Okay, So then, what about the dark side of things? When the community goes visceral and evil and, hates your guts, how do you turn things around? Or actually, give some examples of how bad things have gone in your respective situations, and then maybe how you came to resolve it.
Okay, I'm starting. So we had that group of guys. They were kind of strong leaders in the game, influencers, but we discovered they were the big cheaters as well. So they were hacking the system and everything. So they were posting videos on how to hack the game, and so we had a dilemma because the guy was really popular. So we decided to start, banning the guys. They went ballistic. So they organized a campaign to boycott the game. So say no. So the guys are a lot of influencers. Say, okay, but you say, internally we discussed that and we say, what do we do? So we should, because a lot of people were complaining, oh, we're spending money and those guys are getting everything for free. So at the end, we decided to start, banning the game and, informing the guys, okay, what you're doing. I mean, there is some behavior that it's not good, and so we discovered that their leader, while getting that boycott campaign, had another account, and he was playing like 5 hours a day, and then he started getting. It was a small YouTuber that started getting traction. So at a certain point, he needed us to authorize, the content and things like that. So then we took that and we managed to flip the guy back. Okay, we flipped the guy back and just talked. It was very complicated because we start talking in one of our communities, start talking with him and just, approaching him and saying, okay, I mean, what you're doing, it's not very nice and it's difficult for us because of this, that, blah, blah. And first he was denying everything, no, I'm not doing this and it's not me. And then, so at the end, this turned positively. It was one of our most important influencers, and he started telling the community, stop cheating, it's unfair. So it was really amazing how this guy completely turned that. Then the guy, started to be famous, and then it started professionally to be a YouTuber for even other games. So that was pretty amazing.
So you rehabilitated him fundamentally.
Yes.
Impressive.
Yeah.
Cool. Chris?
So I'd not long started in my role, and we'd had a few complaints about a new feature that'd gone out, and it turned out that there was a big bug, and we had to do a quick update. But during that update, we'd promised a new currency. The new currency was included in the build, but we'd promised to give our players some of that new currency as compensation for lost play days and the hassle of having to go through it. Well, little beknown to me at the time, because it was a new currency, we had no way to mass apply that to all of our users. So there was about a 2-month delay. So I guess my advice there is to make sure what you're telling your players is true and can be done. But the other part of the advice is maintain communication with those players, because we didn't see any negative traction. Players were sticking around because they wanted that currency, and we kept communicating and said, we're doing our best, and when it's released, you'll get it. And yeah, players were really happy. And we've got Facebook communities where they post about these sorts of scenarios in our games. It's really good.
Okay, you heard it here first. Just keep telling your players something's coming in the future. They'll stick around. Everything will be fine. Cool.
I have an example, actually. Your example reminded me of this. So this is mildly via proxy. We were working with a customer who, well-known large developer, had released a MMO on mobile, and they were having a serious issue with cheaters, right? To the point where exploits were being sold online. There were all kinds of kind of hacks that were relatively easy to implement, and it was affecting kind of the player experience. A classic example of this, right? And so, what I thought was interesting, as opposed to this, because this developer had been through, they played this game before. they'd had these scenarios where they had players who were cheating, but were also the most kind of vocal and vociferous fans of the game. And so what they decided to do was, instead of outright banning the players, they decided to sequester the cheaters and only match them with other cheaters. And so they created basically, so they took them off the leaderboards, right? And they basically had all the known cheaters on a single kind of shard playing against one another. And they continued to kind of monetize them through ads. They continued to, it was transparent to the end players. They thought they were still playing the regular game, but they were out of the general population. And the key benefit to the company was, to this day, nobody knows, number one.
Until now.
Right. Not naming names. But this kind of sequestering of cheaters has turned out to be a huge boon to them, because it's created like a petri dish of new exploits once they're created. Because what happens when you have a lot of cheaters playing against other cheaters is they come up with new ways to cheat to try and beat those other cheaters. And so they have this like constant test sample that is helping them kind of improve the experience for everybody else. And more importantly, they're maintaining kind of goodwill with these players who are just, not conventionally exposing themselves to the game, but they're still generating revenue via ads. And they've developed a really interesting mechanism to, once a player has kind of given up on cheating, they slowly move them back into the general population again. And suddenly the game gets more accessible, they get access to newer content, and it's become a really elegant motion. So one of the things we started to do is we've tried to kind of take this framework and work with other developers to try and build out similar solutions. So we're working on kind of building reference architecture for this, but it's a pretty good example of, taking the good with the bad, obviously. There are always going to be some bad actors in your community, but if you can, to your point, either turn them into promoters, which I think is brilliant, or programmatically turn them into promoters without their knowledge, that's just as good.
Cool. Thanks for stealing my thunder. That's brilliant. Yeah, I think it's pretty common. I think this is, toxicity is a major issue, and it's something that I know within Unity we're really looking to address over the next couple of years. Working with studios to understand what solutions they put in place, and I don't think necessarily at this point in time there is a perfect solution for it. I think that segmenting users is a good first start, and we've seen that from a number of studios. I think the problem is that, as you've rightly said, that a lot of your biggest cheaters, the most toxic people within your game, quite often can be some of the highest monetizing users, which gives you a definite conundrum in terms of how you actually approach that. So I think putting them together into different buckets, particularly in multiplayer games where they don't ruin the game experience, is something we've seen work quite successfully. I'm thinking back to the days of tag games, and when we were doing some original games there. I think we had a GTA-esque sort of game on mobile, and we actually had a toxic person even before the game was launched. We put some YouTube videos out and started talking about the game, and we thought, well, let's start building a community now, because we know that GTA is a really popular game, and if we can get some people that love GTA but haven't experienced a GTA-style game on mobile, that would be really exciting. We had this guy in Eastern Europe that was basically just trash-talking us on all the forums and everything else. So it's exactly that. We reached out to him, and we found out he was a really nice guy. And he actually turned out to be a massive evangelist for the game. We got him on side. We sent him some T-shirts, some bits and pieces and everything else, and we made sure that we talked to him at least once a week, and it was incredible. He actually ended up being a positive force for good within that game, and probably helped our sales as well at that point in terms of organic user acquisition. So again, I think probably the learning from that is don't give up on these toxic people. I mean, half the time they tend to really love your game, but they're just expressing it in a really weird way and really annoying everyone else that are trying to play the game in a kind of normal fashion. So if you can find ways to keep them engaged, continue to monetize them, and I guess ensure that they can't spoil the gameplay experience for the rest of your community, that's definitely the most positive outcome.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point you make, actually, about how the most toxic members can often be the ones who actually really do care about what you're doing. And the reason they're so toxic is that it's not quite, it's not quite like how it used to be, or it's not quite conforming to how they wished it would be. But they care, they're engaged, they're retained, and they just don't know how to express themselves well, in a constructive way to you, maybe.
Wait until after Brexit.
Yeah. Well, less said about that, the better, I think. So we've talked about like some of the positives and negatives. I'd like to focus on tools for a second, because a couple of you already mentioned like tools that you use particularly for things like mass gifting. Are there any other tools that you recommend as like, this is absolutely necessary for like keeping your community happy and engaged? What are some of the things you've used in the past?
Please.
Yeah, and I guess the biggest thing that we see across all developers of all shapes and sizes and resources is a lack of planning. I think when you think about running a live game, you can run sometimes headlong into it without thinking, okay, once the game's live, what will I want to do? And I think there are obvious things like gifting, but there are other things like messaging, being able to change the game configuration in real time is pretty important now as well. Thinking about the types of relationships you're going to have with different members of the community, and ensuring that those things are in place even before soft launch, so you can trial them within soft launch and make sure that they're working correctly. Not every game needs in-game voice chat or in-game text chat, but if you're going to incorporate those types of features into your game, then you need to think very carefully about how they're going to be used and make sure that they're the suitable filtering and everything else in place. So I think it's really, for me, thinking about your game and thinking about your community and how that two-way communication and connection is going to work once the game's live. Because probably the worst thing you can do is launch your game and then figure out, oh gosh, we forgot to do this, that, the next thing. I think the example I gave earlier of the small developer, if they hadn't integrated our economy system, they couldn't have provided that gifting, they couldn't have provided that in-game message to say, look, we've got a problem, we're really sorry about it, we're working on it, it'll be fixed soon. They'd have been stuck, and most of their players would have churned, and of course if people are not retained in the game, then they're not going to be able to monetize them, so they'll be losing revenue. So I think planning ahead is the main thing I would say that I'd encourage people to do long before the game hits soft launch.
Cool.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, sorry, and really quickly, just to back up everything Paul mentioned, right? I think one of the big shifts we're seeing on the technology front, from a tooling and kind of back end perspective, is the way that people design the technical components of games is beginning to change. Obviously, the cloud is a big piece of that, right? There's a concept in IT and in development right now called DevOps. If those aren't familiar, right, the idea that the same folks that are building your product are also the ones that are supporting it long term. The idea of sustained maintenance is just a part of building a product. And in this industry, we're not building a retail, necessarily building a single retail box, setting it, it's going gold, and it just stays there and it never gets touched again. That's not the reality we live in. And so I think for us on the Amazon and AWS side, we're really focused on how can we bring things to market that just turn all of the kind of the heavy lifting of managing infrastructure into just code, and then how do we make that as kind of purple dinosaur simple as possible, so that people can just focus on building fun games ultimately. And it's tools like ChilliConnect and Unity and the kind of variety of back-end and middleware solutions that are actually making that really real, and we're just happy to be along for the ride.
At MAG, we use some internal tools for A/B testing and segmentation, and we find that they allow us to target different users in different regions with whatever it is, different sales, different events, just basically customize it for the people in those regions, and that kind of works really well. And then we also use analytics to kind of make those decisions, because if we see a trend in the analytics, then we know that that's a good thing, or a bad thing. But it allows us to make changes.
But is there a risk when you are segmenting audience members like that? If you have a broader community that talk outside of your forums, let's say that, here I have a pack that's priced $5 and another one that's priced $30. How do you square that? Like, is that not a risk for you?
I guess that's a risk, but the players, I guess, that we target with those higher prices or lower prices are players that usually spend more or less. So it's kind of good for them. And we also, I guess, offer other players the ability to move to different segments.
Okay, so you're not like fixing these segments in stone, it's more fluid than that.
Yeah.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, I think you were mentioning about the back end. I think the fact is the community expects you to react first, to acknowledge there is a problem, and then to react as soon as possible. So the trend, so we work with our own tech, but the trend is to move as much as possible on the back end, to be able to change things. Imagine you have a pricing issue, so you can't wait to go the full cycle. You have to maybe just switch it off. Or we had a silly thing. We changed on one of weapon the sound of the weapon. We found it super cool. It was like everybody hated it. So it was like number one. We started at 1 star because of that sound. So lucky enough we had the ability to just server push and change it. But it was like who would imagine that something that we thought it was an improvement just was such a big disaster. So a lot of that, it's more mentality, and then you have a lot of tools, I would say, to connect the feedback, for example, customer service or the community with the dev team to close that loop. Because sometimes you have that feedback, but if it doesn't get back to the guys that are designing, then you're losing a lot of things.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that the industry as a whole is moving in this more holistic direction where departments are not separated in this a very fixed way anymore. Like customer support actually has to be in touch with marketing as well as development and design. Yeah, absolutely agree. Cool. We've got a couple of minutes left, I believe. So I will open up to questions. If anyone has a question, now is the time. If not, we can just sit here for 1.5 minutes and wait.
My favorite color is red, if you were curious.
Red. I like green, personally.
Wrong.
We can't be friends. Any questions, any burning things that you want to ask? If not, thank you, sir.
Hi guys, do you think there's any cardinal sin that's completely unforgivable in engaging with your community? I mean, if we look at, for instance, No Man's Sky went a year without updating the community on what was going on, and yet today, still, after that, they're a huge success and the community loves them, right? So that can't be it. What would it be in your minds?
That's a doozy of a question.
It's a big one.
Yeah. I think, maybe my attitude is slightly different now as a tools provider than a game studio lead, but I think lying to your community generally, barefaced lying, I think in No Man's Sky, I think there was a genuine mistake made in terms of how you market a game. And probably if that was an independent studio that hadn't at that point been acquired and everything else and hadn't been funded in the way they'd been funded, they probably got away with it. But I think because they were perceived as being like a corporation or a large entity, there was a sense this was a cynical ploy just to sell more units of the game, which I don't think it was. So I think they kind of came clean and said, look, we have screwed up, and I think that's always good. I think, so don't lie to your community because they will find you out eventually. Don't try to deceive them in any way. They'll find you out. I think on the flip side of that is engage, listen. The most important thing we do as a business, not just in Chile, but I see this in Unity now as well, is listen to your customers, listen to your community. And for us, that's listening to developers, finding out what they want in terms of tooling within the games. But I think if you're building games, if you can identify the community you're going to have for your game and start to engage them before the game is out, I think that's amazing. And if you can pick out, even just a small handful of evangelists for your game, it'll make your life a lot easier, because it's really hard to spread news. User acquisition costs are going through the roof. Everyone's moaning. It's really hard. The big players are soaking everything up. It's actually as a small team, how do you get some awareness for your game? And if you've got 4 or 5 people that are on the forums talking about it, at events talking about it, it's really going to help you. So embrace them. Don't lie to them. Treat them with respect.
I think if I give one mildly philosophical answer, it's that we have a saying at Amazon that we have to be willing to be misunderstood for an extended period of time, right? And if the courage of our convictions, if we can draw a bold line between how we spend our time and the customer benefiting, then we feel pretty good about that decision in the long term, right? And even if it seems a little bit weird, even if it doesn't really make sense to have a machine in your kitchen that talks to you, right? Eventually, if that vision and execution is good enough and has a good enough experience, things will catch up with the vision, or it's, you walk away, and if it doesn't work, you do something else. And in the games industry context, right, think about experiences think about Untitled Goose Game. right? This game that seemed like a meme, but it turns out to be this exceptional stealth puzzle game, or Stardew Valley, right? A game that's so easy to dismiss on the surface as a Harvest Moon clone turns out to be this incredibly rich experience. It took love and energy and intellectual horsepower to build. So I think being willing to be misunderstood for a really long period of time, if necessary, it's way easier if you're a big company, I know. But if you're passionate about the art you're creating, and if you're passionate about building a really fun game for people, it's hard to imagine that going south on you.
I think, basically when you're communicating with your players, don't ever tell them any lies, and try and be very honest, and make sure the team can deliver something that they're asking for, but that you've agreed internally before. Jumping, don't jump.
Oh, I thought of another one. Don't argue with them, because you're never going to win that argument.
Yeah, I would say don't lie and just listen and communicate. You need to have to open the channel. I think that's important.
Great.
Is it a really quick question?
Probably not, but it does link to the last question.
Okay. One person can answer it.
So on that point about listening to your customers, what do you do when you find that they all want quite different things? There's like different groups that want different things. How do you keep them all happy?
You don't.
We said we weren't going to talk about Brexit. Carry on.
Yeah, I think you do the thing that feels right based on the tenets of your convictions, right? If it's consistent with the end product that you want to create, and if it's not customer hostile, if you're not doing something to cheat your customers out of their agency or their money, right? You're creating a vision. You can always iterate on that. But look, everybody on the stage is wrong all the time. I'm wrong all the time, right? I think everybody in the world is wrong all the time. It's a matter of how we get to write ultimately that creates a good experience for customers, whether you're making a game or whether you're building an app. So, simplistic answer.
Add something. Just let me add very quick. In fact, there is another problem, which is that sometimes the more vocal people are not the ones that are right. So you sometimes need to know who, you listen to them, but then you need to know who is right or who is wrong.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Give a hand to our panelists.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.